This is The Opinions, a show that brings you a mix of voices from New York Times Opinion. You've heard the news. Here's what to make of it.
My name is Carl Swanson, and I'm the Deputy Editorial Director for Culture at Times Opinion. We are only 4 months into the second Trump administration, so it's too early to say what the cultural response will be. But it's not too early to ask the question, what should the response be, from art, music, and from youth culture? The actor, writer, and director John Cameron Mitchell recently wrote an essay for us with an answer to that question. Today's young people need to learn how to be more punk. Mitchell is the writer and performer behind Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Thank you. My name is Hedwig. Please welcome those ambassadors of Eastern Bloc rock, the Angry Inch. Here they are, ladies.
The cult rock musical and film. He also wrote and directed the film Short Bus, which explores community, pleasure, and sex.
Look at all these people out there. They're trying to find the right connection, and I personally expect a few blown fuses before the night is over, and maybe one of them will be yours.
Millennials probably know him better from his role in Lena Dunham's series Girls, playing a kind of tetchy book editor. I've known John Cameron Mitchell for about 20 years, and he's with us today to discuss what he means by punk and what he learned from touring around college campuses this year. John, welcome.
Thank you, Carl.
Well, before we get into punk, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about, well, just, what you were doing the last 4 months. Like, tell me a little bit about the tour that you did, what it sort of consisted of.
Yeah, the tour came about purely for economic reasons. Oh, I'm not acting anymore. I'm going to, do a bit of teaching. I'll cold email a bunch of department heads of colleges that have some resources and say, hey, I'm available, film, TV, whatever. Screenings, singing, gender studies, whatever you want to talk about, I'm available. So I booked my own 14 college tour. And a lot of the professors were even people I knew, my generation. And it started out just as a gig, gigs. And almost immediately I realized we're in a tipping point, certainly in academia, with pressure, old-fashioned pressure from the left and political correctness. And then suddenly Trump is now leaning on these same places for his own purposes, kind of bullying purposes, to kind of shut them down from the right, censor-wise. Mm-hmm. So they have this very narrow Fire Island wooden pathway that they can walk, and you go one side or the other, and someone might complain and you lose your job. So I came in as an independent voice contractor in a way, and oftentimes they were like, we can't talk about these hot button issues, but you can.
Do you feel like that was expressed? That was sort of an expressed part of what the...
It was. Not everybody, but, some of them were like, actually kick their asses with love, John.
Uh-huh.
Actually, let's talk to them. Life doesn't have trigger warnings or consent waivers. Let's talk about, from your point of view, being someone who's always been a bit punk in the way I've made things, about what they're... Because the kids are, like fetuses, they came up through COVID, they can't look you in the eye, and they know it. They're smart enough to even make fun of the fact that they're trapped in their beds and, wearing slippers all year round. And everyone's trapped in their identity, and they're like looking for trouble. They're 20 years old and seeking the flaw out, almost like a cranky old granny. They were getting old before their time. In their rush to be correct, to help, to correct the world, and then start to correct each other and their friends, because you don't cancel a dictator that's in charge. You cancel who you can.
Right.
That's usually someone who's in the room.
Yeah.
Or online with you. We started to correct our buddies to the point where a lot of people were like, I'm out. I'm afraid of being too corrected or canceled or this, that. So I'm just stepping out of the public discourse and not talking about anything controversial. So I was like, guys, we're separating ourselves. As one of the professors said, we've done Trump's work for him by separating ourselves, seeking a purity that is not found in nature, a certain kind of progressive purity.
Well, this is, I think, one of the things that's interesting is the way that the kind of trollish right has taken on that sort of punkish energy. And then the left, of course, became more puritanical, became more sort of
conservative.
And in some ways conservative, yes.
Puritanism is built into our American society anyway. I mean, sadly, in a national way, I think, yes, Trump's taken over a kind of adversarial, owning the libs. He's made politics into actual sports.
Right.
And people have chosen their team.
Yes.
Even if they fail, right, they've chosen Trump.
Yes.
We as progressive people are less forgiving of our leaders.
Do you think that the kids realize that they can't correct each other into the world being a better place?
Well, I think they're starting to realize that because of what happened in the election. And partially it was because of those people seeking purity that he was elected.
Right.
They maybe didn't vote for Kamala, because she was tainted by Gaza, Right-wing people love to ignore the peccadillos. They love to just trust, and they love a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
They love a daddy.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the kids this year. Like, what specifically, what do they sort of feel like or say?
Well, they're bewildered. They're really stunned because the tools they have, which is correction online, don't work now. They're starting to realize there has to be a new way of thinking. And I was encouraging them to look to their youth.
Mm-hmm.
What is inherent in youth?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of hope, the idea of change, and even the idea of rebellion against older Gen Zs who are saying certain things. And I actually had young people saying, well, how do we deal with fascism?
Uh-huh.
The same way they said, how do we access the punk?
Let's roll back a little bit and talk about punk and your concept of punk. Tell me about what that meant to you. I mean, you were sort of you grew up in a military family.
Yeah.
And you were sort of a theater kid, moved to New York, and was
Did Broadway shows.
Broadway shows.
Yeah, and started doing TV.
Tell me about that scene in New York at that time.
Yeah, well, before that was LA, and there was a kind of underground queer scene there too. And then I came to New York in 90, and in the midst of this all was, AIDS was everywhere. And as a young gay man, I was the first generation that came out sexually during safe sex.
Mm-hmm.
So I was saved in a way, whereas people a couple years older who came out, in 83, were not safe and were dying.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this weird optimism of youth, which I would see on my college tour, but also blunted by the mortality of my actual coming out and the negligence of the government letting us die.
Mm-hmm.
And so AIDS activism was truly punk. It was outside the system. It was using imagery in the way that punk bands would.
Mm-hmm.
And they took that kind of art into AIDS activism.
It would be sort of to shake people up. It was imagery that would
to remind people this was happening.
It was transgressive, but also it would shake people off their sort of sense of this is quiet, this is over there.
Yeah.
You have to see this, you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, this is happening around you.
Do you think that punk is sort of inherently political, or do you think it's sort of transgressive first?
It's not always political. People say it kind of sprang out of, actually, Detroit originally with MC5 and Iggy Pop, which was more almost, it was a bit political there. So New York's version of punk, which came later, was more hipster, it was more art-based, Patti Smith. Television, the Ramones.
When we first started, the boredom of what to do, we just had to write about what came natural.
So punk came from all sources. Britain did its own version that has some political element, right?
Absolutely.
God save the Queen, the fascist regime.
There were others like Crass who created their own little anarchist collectives. So there was different kinds of punk, fashion-y, political, group, and the punkness was stepping outside the approved system.
Yes. And your definition of punk also is about helping, it's about community and helping people out. It's not about, and that's part of the idea of
Some
DIY.
would call it sometimes creative destruction, burn that down so green shoots can come up in a different way. Sometimes I disagree with burning it all down.
Sure.
But I love challenging. I've always loved questioning in a way that's not look at me and more like, we can make it better. It can be fun.
Do you worry that you have to sort of keep an eye on your own punkishness to get into yourself to model this?
No, because it's
like, is it instinct?
active. It's making. It's not presenting.
But with this younger generation, I mean, having met these students on your tour and knowing their hesitation to embrace provocation, but also their eagerness to make change, what would you say embracing punk in 2025 should or could look like?
Well, obviously, they are plugged in to the matrix, to the internet, to their phones, and perhaps inextricably. As we know, doom scrolling, overload of information can paralyze you and depress you, as opposed to it's hard to figure out the minimum that you need to know to not just feel like you're dropping out. I just read a few headlines and then move forward with my projects, But I am fascinated by culture and how it changes and by youth's reaction to it, because youth implies suspicion of status quo and seeking to improve, as well as seeking all experience, sex, drugs, Congress, art. And part of that youth thing is also defining yourself.
Right.
And it's almost like their youth has been sucked out of them. Especially the guys have been watching porn for 5 years before they have sex, so the sex is disastrous.
Right.
And they end up not having it. They're not dating. I said, that's your homework.
Yeah, so what is
the
your homework?
metaphor of having sex is what I taught them. And sex, the metaphor, is social intercourse. It's go out there when it's a little bit scary, give it a shot, see what that person's up to. If you're not a leader, seek out someone who is. Volunteer, help out, figure it out, make your art piece, make it fun. What's out there? To me, youth is punk inherently. It's about questioning the status quo. It's about experiencing as much as you can. It's about trying out new modes of clothes and activity and political things too.
And making mistakes.
And making mistakes.
Without fear.
Right. And there is a lot of fear among young people now of IRL because it's uncontrollable. It might make them feel uncomfortable, which they have dubbed unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
Uncomfortable is not unsafe. Unsafe is when your body is in danger. The professors are like, you got to feel safe and physically, but the best class is you feel unsafe intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're being challenged. And that's scary for some people.
I mean, do you ever worry, in terms of what you learn from these kids, there are times when you're going do you ever have that doubt? Like, wait, am I trying to tell people something that made sense to me in my generation, but they grew up in a different context and my solutions are not?
I was nervous at first. I'm like, first of all, am I going to get canceled?
Mm-hmm.
How much can I say? Am I going to upset them? Is the teacher's going to get in trouble?
Right.
But very quickly, I think my first one was Tulane, and then it was LSU, then it was UCLA, the belly of the Hollywood beast.
Uh-huh.
And I showed Short Bus there. Phyllis Nodge, who's a screenwriter, said, John, go in there, no trigger warnings. Let's show them a little bit about where you come from in the 90s. So I came in, they didn't even know who I was necessarily. Hedwig, Short Bus wasn't on their radar. So I'm like crazy punk queer grandpa saying, and try not to say things were better. It's more like, what is now? What can we do now?
So, John, do you think the left can be punk again? And do you have hope?
Well, there's so many lefts now. And, in my hardcore communist and even socialist friends say, they're suspicious of all that, the political correctness. They're like, that's not left. That's just rearranging the deck chairs.
Right.
And it's getting in the way of the actual work that needs to be done. The only thing that has ever made me feel better when I'm dejected by the situation is creativity, generally with someone else. And creativity that is useful, not just a calling card for your career or that's fitting into the system. So it's like stepping out of social media, getting into a place of making something happen in your neighborhood. That's why I live in New Orleans, because I don't feel it being as possible in New York. I think the small cities and the big towns are the future of creativity in America. And, I'm working on this play about Claude Cahun, who
Right.
was a very punk artist in her time in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And she used her actual art to fight Nazi occupation of the island of Jersey in the English Channel. And her way was like to remind these young German soldiers, reminding them, like, what the hell are you doing here? They would take pennies and with nail polish. They were older women at this point. And nail polish, they would
Punk
write.
grandmas.
Yeah. They would write "Victory Never" on one side of the coin, and then on the other side, "War Without End." So almost voicing their fears, these German soldiers' fears. When does this end? What's going on? Why would Hitler stop? And just saying, you're a human being. What are you doing here?
Thanks so much, John.
What a pleasure. Thanks, Carl.
If you like this show, follow it on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Opinions is produced by Derek Arthur, Vishaka Darba, Christina Samuelewski, and Jillian Weinberger. It's edited by Kari Pitkin and Allison Bruzik. Engineering, mixing, and original music by Isaac Jones, Sonia Herrero, Pat McCusker, Carol Saburo, and Afim Shapiro. Additional music by Aman Sahota. The fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta and Christina Samuelewski. The director of Times Opinion Audio is Annie Rose Strasser.